As we continue our study of quadratic equations, we will look at graphing. So one thing you need to be familiar with is recognizing whether an equation that you're given is quadratic or not. I can tell you that this one is quadratic and this one is linear. If you're not able to just identify these the way they are, I recommend that you graph them, and that should help you know whether you're dealing with a line or a quadratic. And then I'd like for you to write down what you notice about these equations, the quadratic ones. Next, I want you to look at y equals x squared. And if you'll put this in your calculator or into something that'll graph, or you can do the calculation, then you can substitute these values, or you can use your calculator and look at the table, and then you'll graph your equation here. And feel free to connect the points that you find. The name of this shape, once you draw it, is a parabola. And it's been a little bit since we've done domain and range. I can tell you that whether it's domain or range, we always want to describe the equation or the graph from least to greatest. And the domain describes all of the x values. And then you'll describe this one that you're drawing, y equals x squared. The range in general describes y values, least to greatest. The domain of any quadratic equation is the set of numbers x that belong to all real numbers. You can also write that in interval notation. This is set notation. Interval notation would be parentheses, negative infinity, then to infinity with parentheses. For the range, it'll depend on if your graph opens up or down. The original equation opens up. So from whatever this point is, y will be everything greater or equal to whatever that y is. For this equation, it'll be 0. And if you wrote that in interval notation, you would write bracket -1, infinity. This will be different if your graph is upside down. Since we write least to greatest, we would write negative infinity up to whatever that value is. Okay. But x is not all of the numbers because it has a lowest or a highest. That's not true. Y is not all numbers because it has a lowest or a highest. Sorry about that. Okay. I want to do this one with you or for you. This is your practice sheet. There are several graphs that are already drawn, and then you describe the graph that is over here. If I describe the domain of this parabola that's graphed already, I would say x could be any number. That's because there's arrows on the left and on the right, and so there's no boundary. It will continue getting higher and wider at the top. So I could write either negative infinity to infinity That's interval notation, or X belongs to the set of all real numbers. That's set notation. For the range, we want lowest to highest. The lowest is here at -1. And there's no highest. It continues upward to infinity. You could also write that as the set of numbers y, which are greater than or equal to -1. The vertex is here. That's where your graph changes direction. So it's decreasing, it gets all the way down to the lowest place where x is -1, and then it goes right back up. My vertex for this graph is at 1, -1. My axis of symmetry is a vertical line through the vertex. Since it's always a vertical line, it's always an x equals equation. So I'll write x equals whatever the x is for the vertex, which is 1. The x-intercepts are where your graph crosses the x-axis. You also might call these solutions or roots or zeros. This is where y equals 0. Y equals 0 on the x-axis. So your graph crosses the x-axis twice when x is 0. And let's write that a little bit differently. We'll just write what the x values are, 0 and 2. My y-intercept, I'll only have 1. That is where my graph crosses the y-axis. This one. This one is where x equals 0. And y is 0 there. Maximum or minimum, this is asking, do I have a lowest or a highest? Maximum is the highest point. Minimum, that's crazy looking. Minimum is the lowest point. For this graph, I have a lowest, so I have a minimum. Please work through these other ones. And then you can compare with the key at my desk.